There's a city in Hubei province called Yichang. 4 million people, which in China makes it unremarkable. It sits on the Yangtze, just downstream of the Three Gorges Dam, so electricity there is cheap and abundant. It also sits on top of one of the largest phosphate deposits in the country. For most of modern history, that was a fertilizer story. Phosphate goes into crops. Nobody outside agriculture paid attention to it. Today, Yichang makes cathode material, battery cells, energy storage systems, and it has shipyards working on electric vessels, not a cluster of battery factories. An entire battery economy grown on top of a mineral deposit that used to matter only to farmers. Here's the number that explains why. In 2018, lithium iron phosphate batteries, the ones that use that phosphate, held about 7% of the global electric vehicle market. Nickel-based chemistries held nearly 80%. In 2025, phosphate batteries passed nickel for the first time. Inside China, they now account for over 80% of installations. That reversal is the whole story, and the part almost nobody tells you is where the technology came from. It wasn't invented in China. Start with the BET the West made. Every lithium battery needs a cathode, and for 2 decades there were 2 serious candidates. One used nickel, manganese, and cobalt. Call it the nickel route. It packs more energy into the same weight, which means more range from the same size pack. If you're an automaker whose customers are anxious about running out of charge, that's the obvious answer. The other used iron and phosphate. Cheaper, safer, far longer cycle life, no cobalt at all. But roughly 20 to 30% less energy for the same weight. Heavier packs, shorter range. Western automakers looked at that trade and picked nickel, almost unanimously. Range was the thing customers complained about, so range was the thing to engineer for. Phosphate got written off as a chemistry for buses and forklifts. Fine where weight doesn't matter, hopeless in a car. That judgment was correct at the time. It just stopped being correct, and by the time it did, the factories were already built. Now, where the phosphate cathode actually came from, John Goodenough and Arumugam Manthiram, working at the University of Texas at Austin, published the foundational papers on iron-based cathodes in the late 1980s. Goodenough published the first paper on lithium iron phosphate, itself in 1997. He'd later share a Nobel Prize for his work on lithium batteries. The university patented it, but patents are territorial. You have to file and pay in every jurisdiction you want covered, and the filing did not cover China. Manthiram has been blunt about what that meant. In his words, LFP was free for them from day one. So Chinese manufacturers could build on it without a license, without a royalty, and without asking anyone. Meanwhile, the same technology outside China sat inside a thicket of licensing agreements and disputes that took years to work through. The core patents did not begin expiring until around 1917, with the carbon coating patent that made the material commercially usable running to 2022. For roughly 2 decades, one country could develop this chemistry freely and everyone else could not. But free access alone doesn't win anything. Phosphate still had that energy density problem, and no amount of cheap licensing fixes physics, so they stopped attacking the chemistry and attacked the box instead. A traditional battery pack is built in layers. Cells go into modules, modules go into a pack, the pack goes into the car. Every layer adds casing, wiring, and structure that stores no energy at all. Roughly 40% of the volume inside a pack was doing nothing but holding the rest together. CATL's cell-to-pack designs and BYD's blade battery deleted the module layer. The cells themselves became structural, long, flat blades running the width of the floor, bonded directly into the pack, which is bonded into the car body. The cells were still less energy dense than nickel. The packs weren't. That's the move. Not a chemistry breakthrough. Better packaging. Hold on to that because it explains why the West couldn't just switch. If you want more of these, the stories where the decisive move turns out to be something other than the obvious one, subscribe and turn notifications on. Then came 2021, and Tesla started putting phosphate cells in its standard range cars globally. That single decision did more for the chemistry's credibility than a decade of Chinese production had. If Tesla would ship it, the objection was dead. What followed was very fast. Phosphate batteries went from under 10% of the global market in 2020 to roughly half by 2024, and past nickel entirely in 2025. Within China, they hit 81% of installations last year, and the companies that owned that transition now own the industry. CATL held around 39% of the global battery market in 2025, its ninth consecutive year at number one on revenue of over 400 billion yuan. BYD sat second at roughly 16%. Chinese manufacturers together crossed 70% of global installations for the first time. The combined share of the three Korean giants fell to under 17%. Now, three things that complicate the standard telling of this. First, and this matters most, the usual Western explanation is subsidies, cheap labor, and weak environmental rules. There's some truth in the subsidies, but it doesn't explain the outcome because the fiercest competition Chinese battery makers face is each other. CATL's domestic share actually fell in 2025, squeezed by BYD and by second-tier manufacturers now shipping fast-charging cells of their own. This isn't a national team moving in formation, it's a knife fight that happens to be taking place in one country. Second, the West isn't locked out. Nickel chemistries still win on long range and still dominate premium vehicles. The phosphate patents have expired, so anyone can build it now. Korean and European manufacturers are competitive on technology. What they lack is the 20 years of accumulated production experience that only comes from making mistakes at scale, and no amount of capital compresses that. Third, and this is the argument worth taking seriously, there's a case that Western policy has been aiming at the wrong target entirely. We don't need batteries so that we can own battery factories. We need them to move cheap midday solar into the evening, to replace imported oil with domestic electricity, to stop paying wind farms to switch off because the grid can't move the power. Last year, the UK spent well over £1 billion doing exactly that. The value in a battery may be created mostly after it leaves the factory, and that infrastructure has to be built where the electricity is used, which is to say, not in China. So here's where this lands. China didn't win batteries by building the same thing more cheaply. It made a different bet on a chemistry the West had written off, invented in a Texas lab, and left unprotected in the one country that would take it seriously. Then it spent 20 years fixing the one thing that chemistry was bad at. The uncomfortable part isn't that anyone cheated, it's that the decisive choice was made around 2015 by engineers arguing about cathode materials, and almost nobody outside that room noticed it was being made at all.